The Saturday afternoon sun streamed through the skylights of Westbridge Mall, casting golden light across the polished floors. Captain Eleanor Hayes walked with quiet confidence, her leather purse swaying against her side. After a week filled with endless reports, tense meetings, and the weight of command, she wanted nothing more than a simple distraction. Buying her niece Lily a birthday present felt like a breath of air in a life that rarely allowed her to stop and breathe. Something special for her, Eleanor whispered under her breath as she scanned the glittering storefronts. The mall hummed with weekend chatter, children tugging at their parents, couples drifting hand in hand, and groups of teenagers clustering by the fountain with sodas in their hands. For once, Eleanor allowed her shoulders to loosen, her stride to slow. She could almost pretend she was just another woman out shopping. That fragile peace broke when she saw them. In the reflection of a shop window, two security guards hovered at what they thought was a discreet distance. The tall one, his name tag reading Tom Briggs, was speaking into his radio with deliberate calm, though his eyes never left her. The shorter guard, Evan Cole, seemed less sure of himself, glancing back and forth like someone caught in the middle of a dare. Eleanor's jaw flexed. She knew this routine. 20 years as a cop, and she could recognize a tail instantly. Being followed in stores wasn't new. She'd lost count of the times her skin color and a leather purse had been enough to raise suspicion. That didn't make the sting any less sharp. Briggs's voice carried across the corridor, louder than it needed to be. Black female, brown leather bag, blue sweater, keeping eyes on. Her hands tightened around the strap of her purse. The urge to turn, flash her badge, and watch his smugness collapse was strong. But she wasn't here as Captain Hayes. She was here as an aunt, trying to find Lily something bright to unwrap. She inhaled slowly, holding the tension in her chest, then stepped through the glass doors of Crystal & Co., the boutique at the corner. The smell of vanilla perfume and polished glass filled her senses. Jazz played softly, but the atmosphere grew sharper when the woman behind the counter noticed her. The tag read Margaret Price. The smile she offered was thin, brittle, and her eyes never quite met Eleanor's. "Can I help you?" Margaret asked, her voice crisp. "Just browsing, thank you," Eleanor said, steady and polite. She approached a glass case filled with delicate bracelets, the kind Lily had hinted about for months. Her heart softened a little at the thought of her niece's bright smile, but Margaret didn't retreat. She stood close, her reflection glaring back from the mirror behind the counter. Eleanor could feel the woman's suspicion radiating in every stiff movement. Outside the boutique's entrance, Briggs and Cole loitered, pretending to study the mall directory, their radios at the ready. "These are all locked cases," Margaret announced loudly, stepping near Eleanor as though to block her from the display. "Only staff can remove items." "I understand," Eleanor replied calmly, though the muscles in her neck were tightening. "When I'm ready to see something, I'll let you know." Margaret lingered, her gaze flicking once more to Eleanor's purse. The fine leather bag, something Eleanor had saved months to afford, now felt like a spotlight burning against her hip. Finally, Eleanor straightened and said, "I'd like to see the silver bracelet there, the one with the butterfly charm." Margaret hesitated, fumbling with her keys, her hands shaking slightly. When she unlocked the case and drew out the bracelet, Eleanor's eyes softened. The delicate links glittered, crystals winking across tiny silver wings. "Lily would adore it. I'll take—" Eleanor began. Margaret's voice cut through, sharp as glass. "I need to see inside your bag." The boutique went silent. Even the soft jazz seemed to fade. Eleanor blinked once, steadying herself as other shoppers glanced up from displays, sensing tension in the air. "Excuse me?" she asked, her tone calm but edged. "A piece of jewelry is missing from this case," Margaret said, her voice rising in volume and confidence now that she had an audience. "I saw you slip something inside your purse." Eleanor's pulse throbbed, not with fear but with fury. "That is absolutely false. I haven't touched anything but the bracelet you just showed me." Miller stepped forward into the store with Evan a step behind. His hand rested on his radio like a badge of power. "Ma'am, please cooperate. Empty your bag on the counter." Eleanor drew herself to her full height. 2 decades of service settled across her like armor. Her voice was firm, unwavering. "I will not. You have no probable cause. You have no evidence. You have no right." Evan shifted nervously, but Margaret doubled down. Either show us what's inside or we'll call the police. This is harassment, Eleanor said, her voice carrying now. You've followed me since I entered this mall. You are targeting me because I am black, and I will not submit to this humiliation. Miller's bulk moved closer. Last chance. Open the bag, or things get complicated. Her heart beat steadily, her voice unwavering. I'm not opening anything. Back off. Miller snatched his radio. Code 10 at Crystal & Co. Subject refusing to comply. Requesting police backup. Phones rose among the crowd gathering at the entrance, recording the scene. Margaret's face flushed, but her chin lifted stubbornly. Evan looked as if he wanted to be anywhere else. But Eleanor stood firm, her purse secure at her side, her gaze locked on Miller's. You're making a very big mistake, she said quietly. The air seemed to thicken, the tension electric. Shoppers whispered, shifting for better angles with their phones. And then, as if on cue, the broad figure of Officer Brian Keller strode in, his badge gleaming under the boutique lights. His reputation had traveled far before him. Complaints of aggression, excessive force, especially against black shoppers, a trail of cases buried under political protection. What do we have here? Keller's voice boomed, already smug. His hand rested near his weapon, a deliberate move. She won't let us check her bag, Margaret rushed to explain. Something's missing. Keller's gaze fixed on Eleanor, his smirk widening. Always the same story, isn't it? Eleanor lifted her chin, her voice measured. Officer, this is a misunderstanding that could be resolved by reviewing security. She didn't finish. Keller seized her shoulder, slamming her against the glass wall of the boutique. The impact rattled the display cases and drew gasps from the crowd. The glass pressed cold against her cheek as Keller leaned in, his voice low and venomous. Don't tell me how to do my job. Hands behind your back. This is excessive force, Eleanor declared loudly, every word aimed at the audience of raised phones. I have rights and you are violating them. You've got the right to shut up while I add resisting arrest to your charges, Keller sneered, yanking her arms back. The handcuffs bit into her wrists, sharp and unrelenting. The crowd swelled at the entrance. Phones captured every second, whispers rising into shouts. Some voices called out that it wasn't right. Others demanded she be let go. Keller paraded her out into the mall's main corridor, smug and loud. Should have just cooperated, he announced. Playing for the crowd. Shoppers pressed back, filming the sight of a well-dressed black woman in cuffs. Eleanor kept her head high, even as her arms ached. At the side exit, Keller's patrol car waited. He shoved her forward, his hand on the door. Eleanor turned sharply, her voice cutting through the chaos. Before this goes further, I think you should know something, Officer Keller. I am Captain Eleanor Hayes, 12th Precinct. My badge is in my front pocket, which you'd know if you'd bothered to ask before assaulting me. The crowd erupted. Murmurs turned into shouts. Phones zoomed in. Keller's hand froze as he patted her pocket, pulling out the heavy gold badge that glittered in the afternoon sun. His face faltered, then hardened. Fake! He barked. Another charge, impersonating an officer. The crowd roared louder. She's a captain, someone shouted. He arrested a police captain for shopping. Keller's grip tightened, but his voice had lost its edge. The chant of voices rose like a tide. Eleanor held her ground, eyes blazing. Every second of this is being recorded, she said, clear and calm. Every abuse, every violation. Are you sure you want to continue? The crowd's fury swelled, dozens of voices joining into a unified cry for justice. Phones streamed live, the story already spreading faster than Keller could contain. His face reddened as he realized the trap he had walked into. And still, Eleanor stood tall, wrists bound but spirit unbroken, her calm voice carrying over the storm he had unleashed. The holding cell smelled faintly of bleach and cold metal. Eleanor sat on the narrow bench, her wrists raw from the handcuffs. Hours had passed since Officer Keller had shoved her into the back of his cruiser, ignoring the swelling crowd of witnesses shouting for her release. Hours in which no one had offered her water, no one had explained the charges, and no one had acknowledged the badge still sitting in an evidence bag on the other side of the wall. Her phone buzzed endlessly in her bag, which had been confiscated. She knew by now that word had spread far beyond Westbridge Mall. Every bystander with a camera had turned the incident into a dozen viral clips. And yet the silence from within the station was heavy, deliberate. At last, the steel door screeched open. Keller swaggered in, his smirk unchanged, a sheet of paper in his hand. "You're officially booked," he said, sliding the paper across the bench. "Shoplifting, resisting arrest, disorderly conduct. Quite the record for a police captain." Eleanor stared at him, unflinching. "You know these charges won't stick." "The cameras show everything. That crowd out there?" Keller scoffed. "A mob of bored kids with phones. That footage will disappear or get buried under the real story." He tapped the paper. "My story." The door slammed shut again, leaving her with the echo of his words. By the next morning, Eleanor's fears were confirmed. A local news broadcast blared in the common room of the precinct, reporting a dramatic arrest at Westbridge Mall where a woman claiming to be a police captain attempted to resist authorities after a theft. Keller's version of events, delivered with calm authority on camera, was already being circulated as truth. But Eleanor wasn't without allies. 2 hours later, her attorney, Samantha Reed, arrived with fire in her eyes. She was sharp, unyielding, and known for shredding flimsy cases with precision. "They're holding you on fabricated charges," Samantha said, slamming her briefcase down. "I've seen the footage from 5 different angles. You didn't steal a damn thing." "They know it. This is about humiliation, not justice." "Then let's fight it," Eleanor said, her voice steady but her eyes heavy with exhaustion. "It won't be that simple," Samantha warned. "The department is circling the wagons. Keller's report was filed before you even got booked. According to him, you became violent, threatened staff, claimed false authority. They've built a narrative designed to discredit you." Eleanor leaned forward. "Then we expose it, piece by piece." Outside the walls of the precinct, momentum was building. Clips of her arrest had racked up millions of views online. Hashtags demanding her release trended nationally. And in the midst of the chaos, a determined voice pushed through the noise. Rachel Adams, an investigative journalist known for her relentless pursuit of truth. Rachel reached out to Samantha, requesting an interview. At first, Eleanor hesitated. Every word could be twisted, every sentence weaponized. But Samantha insisted. "You need to tell your side before Keller's version becomes the only version that matters." The interview took place 2 days later, in Samantha's office. Rachel's recorder sat between them, her eyes steady, her questions sharp but respectful. "Captain Hayes," she began, "the footage shows you being handcuffed without evidence. Can you walk us through what happened in your own words?" Eleanor spoke carefully, recounting the boutique, the accusation, Keller's arrival, and the violent arrest. Her voice didn't waver even as the memory burned fresh. Rachel listened, occasionally nodding, scribbling notes. "And Keller's claim that you resisted?" Rachel asked. "False," Eleanor replied firmly. "I stated my rights calmly and clearly. My so-called resistance was refusing to allow an illegal search of my purse." Rachel leaned back, her expression grim. "I've reviewed Keller's history. He has at least 6 complaints of excessive force, all buried or dismissed. The system has protected him for years, but this time, the evidence is too public to ignore." By the end of the week, the story had shifted. National outlets picked up the footage. Civil rights organizations called for Keller's suspension. Protesters gathered outside the Westbridge Police Department, holding signs with Eleanor's face printed beside the words, "She stood her ground." But with visibility came danger. The threats began with anonymous messages on Eleanor's social media. "Drop it or pay the price. You think you can take down the system? Think again." Then came the phone calls, silent at first, then filled with muffled laughter and heavy breathing. One night, after a particularly long strategy meeting with Samantha and Rachel, Eleanor returned home to find her front door ajar. Inside, nothing had been stolen, but her framed commendations lay shattered on the floor. A message had been scrawled across her bathroom mirror in red marker. "Know your place." The police report she filed went nowhere. "No signs of forced entry," the responding officer said flatly. Could be a prank. His eyes avoided hers. She didn't need to ask why. Keller's influence ran deep. Despite the threats, Eleanor refused to back down. With Rachel's help, she began piecing together a timeline of Keller's misconduct. Witnesses who had once been silenced came forward, emboldened by her defiance. A teenager named Sierra Lane recounted how Keller had once accused her of shoplifting a bottle of nail polish, forcing her to strip search in a back office. Her story alone shook the community, but Keller wasn't idle. He doubled down, appearing on news broadcasts, portraying himself as the victim of a smear campaign. His allies in the department leaked selective footage, cropped and edited to make Eleanor appear aggressive. Rumors circulated about her past cases, her leadership, her integrity. The battle lines had been drawn. In church basements and community centers, meetings were held to organize protests. Reverend Charles Morgan, a fiery speaker with a booming voice, called the case a turning point in the fight against systemic abuse. His words ignited the crowd. "If they can do this to a captain," he thundered, "they can do it to any of us." By the end of the month, thousands marched through downtown, chanting Eleanor's name alongside demands for accountability. The city council announced a public hearing. Keller, Eleanor, and several witnesses would testify. It would be televised live, the whole country watching. As Eleanor prepared for that day, the weight of it pressed down on her. Her career, her reputation, and perhaps even her safety hung in the balance. But she also knew the truth had a way of cutting through lies, no matter how thickly they were layered. The night before the hearing, she sat alone in her living room, the pieces of her shattered commendation still waiting to be repaired. She touched one frame gently, whispering to herself, "You've survived worse. Stand tall." Outside, the distant sound of chanting protesters echoed through the city streets. The world was waiting. The morning of the hearing broke gray and heavy, rain misting across the city as though the sky itself was holding its breath. Eleanor dressed carefully, her uniform pressed and immaculate. Every medal and bar on her chest told the story of battles fought, arrests made, lives protected. It wasn't vanity, it was armor. She knew the cameras would linger on her, that every detail of her appearance would be scrutinized. When she stepped outside, the chants struck her like a wave. Hundreds of people lined the courthouse steps, umbrellas raised, voices unified in a steady rhythm. "Justice for Hayes! Justice for Hayes!" Signs bobbed in the air, demanding Keller's resignation, demanding accountability. Eleanor paused, overwhelmed for a moment by the sheer force of it. These weren't just strangers. These were citizens who had seen her humiliation and decided it mattered. Inside, the chamber buzzed with tension. Council members sat in a raised semicircle, their faces stern, their microphones gleaming. Reporters packed the back rows, cameras flashing as Eleanor took her seat at the witness table. Across from her, Officer Brian Keller leaned back smugly, his uniform crisp, his attorney whispering in his ear. He still carried the same arrogance, but there was a tightness in his jaw now, a flicker of unease when he glanced at the cameras. The proceedings began with testimony from store clerk Margaret Price. Her voice trembled as she repeated her claim that Eleanor had behaved suspiciously and may have concealed merchandise. But when council members pressed her on what she had actually seen, her answers faltered. She hadn't seen Eleanor take anything. She admitted she had simply felt uneasy. Murmurs rippled through the room, then came Keller's turn. He delivered his version smoothly, his words rehearsed. He painted Eleanor as belligerent, aggressive, a woman who used her position to intimidate law enforcement. He insisted the arrest had been by the book. But when the council played the unedited footage, the chamber shifted. The video showed Eleanor calm and composed, refusing an illegal search. It showed Keller slamming her against the glass with unnecessary force, handcuffing her before she could even finish identifying herself. Gasps echoed in the room. Keller's confident mask cracked for a moment, his eyes narrowing at the screen as though sheer willpower could alter what everyone was seeing. Then Eleanor rose to speak. She didn't shout, didn't rage. Her voice was steady, deliberate, carrying the weight of 2 decades in uniform. She recounted the humiliation of being followed, accused, manhandled. She described the threats she had received, the vandalism of her home. And then she widened the lens, speaking not only for herself but for every person who had endured similar treatment without a badge to shield them. "This is bigger than me," she said, her eyes sweeping the chamber. "If this can happen to a captain in broad daylight, imagine how many others have been silenced in the shadows. This isn't about one officer's misconduct. This is about a system that protects the abuser instead of the abused." The chamber erupted in applause despite the chair's attempts to quiet the crowd. Witness after witness stepped forward. Sierra Lane, the teenage girl, testified about her traumatic encounter with Keller. A store employee admitted that Briggs and Cole had been pressured to file false statements. Even Evan Cole himself broke under questioning, his voice cracking as he confessed that Keller had ordered him to back up lies in the report. "I didn't know how to say no," he whispered, tears streaking his face. By the time Rachel Adams presented her investigative findings, years of buried complaints, internal memos showing deliberate cover-ups, the room was electric. The council members exchanged grave looks. What had started as one woman's arrest was now exposed as a web of corruption, intimidation, and abuse. Keller's attorney tried to object, to discredit, but the tide had turned. The evidence was overwhelming. Keller's smirk had vanished entirely, replaced with a cold, hollow stare. The council chair leaned forward, her gavel striking once. "This committee recommends immediate suspension of Officer Keller pending criminal investigation. Furthermore, we will open a full inquiry into systemic misconduct within the Westbridge Police Department." The chamber exploded in cheers. Outside, the crowd's roar shook the windows. Eleanor sat back, a weight lifting from her chest. It wasn't over. The investigation, the trials, the reforms would take years. But for the first time since that day in the mall, she felt the tide shifting. As the hearing adjourned, Eleanor stepped outside into the storm of cameras and chants. Protesters surged forward, but this time the sight didn't feel overwhelming. It felt like solidarity. Reverend Charles Morgan found her in the crowd, clasping her hand firmly. "You stood tall," he said, his voice carrying above the noise. "And now the city is standing with you." Rachel approached next, recorder still in hand, her eyes fierce but warm. "This is only the beginning," she said. Eleanor nodded, knowing she was right. That evening, Eleanor returned home. The broken frames had been cleared away, the mirror scrubbed clean, but the memory of the threats lingered. She poured herself a glass of water and sat quietly, listening to the muffled echoes of protest still drifting through the streets. Her phone buzzed with messages of support from colleagues, neighbors, even strangers across the country. One in particular made her pause. A video of Lily, her niece, holding up a sign in the crowd that read, "My aunt is a hero." Tears filled Eleanor's eyes for the first time since the ordeal began. She let them fall freely, not out of weakness, but out of release. The battle wasn't finished. There would be retaliation, resistance, attempts to bury the story. But the truth was out now, and it was louder than Keller, louder than any cover-up. Eleanor Hayes had been dragged through humiliation, but she had refused to bow. And in doing so, she had become not just a survivor of injustice, but a catalyst for change. The storm outside deepened, rain lashing against the windows. But inside Eleanor's home, a steady light burned. She sat straighter, her shoulders squared, her heart steadied by the knowledge that this was not an ending. It was the beginning of something larger than herself, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to smile.